a lot of information in this chapter. And so it's about like how schools are governed and kind of run basically, and then how they are also like financed. So where the money comes from for the schools to operate basically. So if you have questions on that as we're going, just interrupt me and we can talk about it, deviate, off some of that stuff. So I don't know how interested, or questions you or people have on that. And so as a teacher, sometimes we don't always dive into that in terms of the financial piece. We kind of know what we have for a budget and where some of the funds are coming from. And also in terms of governance, we're more aware of that, I think. And some schools have a lot of teachers involved with some of the governance decision-making stuff, but it just kind of depends on the school. So if you got questions, let me know. We'll go through that. So, the one thing that shouldn't be in education, but is kind of some political stuff with that, So it talks about power, influence, and authority. So in your opinion or experiences, who are some people that can use their power, influence, or authority to affect like school policy, school structure? Do you know any?
Just from my own experience around here, it's the ones that back sports.
Okay.
They're sponsors.
Sure. Yep.
Because they, like if students get put like on probation or whatever, they have to sit out game, especially if it's one of their starters.
Sure.
Then they don't sponsor as much. So fundraiser.
Sure. Yep. So boosters or sponsors or parents or whoever might be behind like the sports team, for example, or whatever their like really passion is, with that, they might have some influence on policy. So if somebody gets in trouble, for something, what is the policy on that? Maybe that needs to be changed. If it's out for 2 weeks, maybe it should only be a week, or if it's for 4 weeks, maybe it should be 2. But anybody in terms of like power, influence, authority to affect instructional, curricular, co-curricular, can do it in a variety of ways, actually. So maybe I decide I want something changed in the school and I run for school board, right? And then I really push my agenda on the school board. That's a way that can be, influenced. I can get some power that way, right? Or maybe I join part of, an organization to change, a school policy or the way something is done. And I call the superintendent, call the principal, try to get meetings, go through all those components, go to the school board meetings and try to throw my influence in that way, so that's another way. I might become a state legislature, not legislature, part of the tribal council, different things that will influence policy or change policy at, maybe the state level or the tribal level that go to schools that they have to implement or change or whatever it might be. But there's a variety of ways that people try to use their power to make change based on what they think, is good, right? So school board, being part of a group, being at the state level, even at the federal level. Because all the schools have to follow, depending on the type of school, whether you're a public school or you're like a BIE or tribal school, you have to follow certain rules. State and private schools have to follow the state and some federal regulations, right? Tribal schools and BIE schools have to follow federal regulations and some state regulations. So it depends on where your sphere of influence is on how you can do that. So, but if you want to change something, go for it. Be the squeaky wheel, right? Because usually the squeaky wheel gets some attention and gets listened to, right? If something's not going the way that I like it or anybody else, and we don't go and talk to somebody about it, it's not going to change. So here, like we said, parents, students, teachers, administrators, taxpayers, all these people can shape and can use some politics, can use some influence to try to change things with, if they don't like something, right? Maybe I said it in this class, but I know like some taxpayers are concerned with their taxes, right? When you have a public school, that's how they raise or get a lot of their funding, is that people who own property have to pay property taxes, right? And those taxes go to, part of them go towards, you know, schooling and providing for schools. So people often will complain about, you know, taxes. And actually I had heard of somebody wanting a refund on their taxes last year because since schools were shut down in March, they wanted a refund on their taxes because school wasn't in session. I want my money back, but it doesn't quite work that way because schools were still in session technically, you know. So yeah, there's a lot of ways that different people can be involved or that help to shape educational policy. So a lot of times we probably think of administrators as the ones shaping that a lot, but you know, hopefully parents and teachers in schools should be involved somewhat with that. They might have a committee, they might have, you know, some people that help with things. Most schools probably have some kind of a parent committee. In fact, with Title I funds, if schools get those, they have to have a committee of parents that help with decisions and input on some of that funding. So students, teachers, what else? Okay, other people. So like I talked about, federal, state, and local, okay, can also be involved with that. Researchers, no, not so much. Corporate sector, special interest groups. Corporate sector would be like business stuff. So some businesses will support things or will, you know, provide funds. Maybe not as much in our area. We have, you know, smaller communities, less businesses, but I think there are some that do. You know, are concerned with stuff. I know like there's some businesses in Mobridge that help sponsor this junior achievement program. That's like a business focused thing. And they come into the elementary and do some activities and different stuff. So that might be a good example of that. Let's see. I would skip over that. So local community, how does the local community influence schools? So it depends on the school district, how big it is, how small it is, you know, how it's organized. So the school districts, right, vary. So for us, a school district is that basically just our community, right? If bigger communities, the school districts might be, you know, in Dallas or Minneapolis, there might be multiple school districts in the city, right? But for us, when we
like
think,
goes from this street to this street.
right,
This avenue to this
right,
avenue.
yep, exactly. Yep, that's kind of how they do those districts. Out here, I mean, we have bigger districts that take in like parts of the country, right, or the rural areas rather than just cities. And so within those districts, they also have like school boundaries as well, like in the bigger cities, right? So in Bismarck, there's, I don't know, 2 or 3 high schools, right? And so they have these kind of boundaries set up that if you live in here, you go to Bismarck Century, or if you live over here, you go to Lincoln High School, or I don't know which is which up there, but there's boundaries for this district and then there's boundaries for the schools as well. But with open enrollment, now students can kind of decide which school they want to go to within, as long as there's room for them to go to.
I had to do that with my kids.
Yep.
Because we lived in the area.
Right. So the, you know, Waupaula district, it goes up towards Kennel here, and the, you know, right along the river, you know, and on the other side of the river is Mobridge district a little bit. It's not a real big district, but so yeah, if you want to go out of the district that you live in, then you have to fill out those open enrollment forms saying that I want to go here. This is why. You have to say why you want to go there, but you have to fill those out, and the school has to approve them. So, and usually it's not an issue for open enrollment stuff unless like don't have room or something like that for students. You know, if it would get to be a very large, you know, classrooms or something like that. But most of the time, open enrollment is pretty easy. So, let's see. So the district influences at the school board, obviously can influence the schools. So depending on the type of school, it depends on the board, right? Most of the boards we know are elected, right? You have to run, you have to go through the election point. Some are appointed, like special schools. I don't know if you've talked about like charter schools and magnet schools a little bit at all, but those are different schools, and those school board members can be like appointed. Like if I want to start a school, a charter school, I might say I want these people on my school board because they are very good at like helping to raise money, for example. And so then they can help, raise funds for, whatever. So most are elected, public, BIE, private, those types of things are elected. Private is not elected. Private is appointed, but then those other ones are appointed. But good school boards focus on the use of all of these components here, and they're responsible for approving teachers, helping administrators, helping with policies, answering questions, and effective school boards focus on student achievement, resources, investment, data, engaging the community. Okay? So ineffective school boards focus on any ideas? It's okay if you don't have personal agendas, right? I'm running for school board because this teacher is horrible, or my student had a bad experience, or this coach didn't play my kid, or whatever. So if you have a personal agenda and you really just focus on that and not a lot of these other things, that's not very good. So personal agendas, sports or activities, if you just focus on those, that's not real good. Just wanting to be in power and trying to micromanage things make it very difficult for schools to operate effectively. So achievement, resources, return on investment, making sure that money that is being spent in the right ways and is good. Data and engaging the community. So it should be part of like being involved with the community and hearing what people have to say and listening. So we talked about these people a little bit already, but superintendent, parents, school restructuring. A lot of schools now are using shared decision making. So rather than like school board making a decision or just the superintendent and then kind of going downhill, trying to get in, like I talked about, parents and other teachers and stuff into making some of those decisions. So a lot of schools are kind of moving towards that shared decision making model, rather than just the principal superintendent making a decision and everybody having to follow. So of course the state influences education by really passing policy and then also providing funding for the schools, right? So the state has a formula, they create a budget and they say schools are getting this amount per pupil, and then they send that money out basically. So but policy and funding are the big piece for that. Each state has a Department of Education, that they help schools with. So let's see. Each state has like a chief state school officer or Department of Ed, Secretary of Education type thing, and they're the head of those departments or of the state Department of Education. And really they deal with, like it says, some of the day-to-day concerns, but also the policy creation as well. So each state also has regional education agencies that will help with like professional development, basically. So they will provide assistance in whatever areas you like need help with. Either the state identifies help, or like maybe you as a school identify that. So say you have a school that is struggling and they're in what the state calls school improvement, meaning that they're in need to improve in some areas. The state might use these regional education agencies to help the schools with, maybe it's a reading curriculum, or maybe it's a instructional strategies, or it could be a variety of things. Yeah, a lot of times that is, yep, where they will have some kind of training or something related to, it could be a variety of things, but each school throughout the year typically has to have a certain number of hours of like training in service during the year. So that could be, and it could be used for a variety of things. A lot of schools will use in-service days for like data analysis, where maybe the kids have done some assessments, like reading and math. They'll take a day or half a day to look at that information and analyze it, see where the kids are at, plan for instruction. Sometimes it's brand new, like instructional strategies, or maybe a new curriculum or new technology. But yeah, it just depends on what their needs are and kind of what they're looking at. But yeah, a lot of times these regional education agencies will help with that. Sometimes the state does, sometimes it's independent stuff. It just kind of depends. So let's see. So a few things in here in terms of federal government. Federal government's a little farther away, it seems like from us than like the state and local. But the federal government does influence us quite a bit, both public schools, private schools, BIE schools, tribal schools. They all, especially the BIE and tribal schools, there's a lot of influence there because the funding and the policies are more federally directed, whereas the state and private are more state directed, but some federal direction as well. Two federal initiatives about the GI Bill, right? So I heard of the GI Bill before, which is a way for, if people who join the military, it's a way for them to like help pay for schooling, help ensure that, colleges and universities are fair, I guess, that the veterans people I have gone to are in service or have been in service. So it's a way to, yep. Yeah, that's the biggest piece of it right now, with that is still used. Right, yep. Yeah, that's a one, a big benefit that if people want to use it, they don't, not everybody has to, but a lot of people do use that. So this late 9th Act, basically they built schools close to factories and stuff during World War II, because people were kind of either moving there, a lot of people were working there, they had childcare close there, so it was like almost a big community almost, so they could get people to continue working in these factories and create, stuff needed for the war. And that was a big component at that time. So let's see. So the federal government, they promote educational goals. They have a big Department of Education, Washington, D.C. And in recent years, the biggest thing that they've done, is that No Child Left Behind Act in the 90s, and then more recently, Obama created or passed the Every Student Succeeds Act, which just kind of changes to that No Child Left Behind. So really, when we think about the big piece that they have done is providing accountability to schools. That schools have to be doing X, Y, and Z. If they're not, then they have to do A, B, and C in order to stay in the good graces, I guess, of the department. So they promote goals, they provide aid in a variety of ways. So I can talk about like Title I funding. That's federal money for schools with students who have like they use the free and reduced lunch piece for that Title I funding. So they see how many students are on that, and then they provide a certain amount per student with that. So Title I is that schools whose districts are on lands that pay like taxes. So like any federal lands, which are like reservations, right? There's no tax on some of the land on reservations. Military bases, there's no tax on that because it's a federal property, so the federal government doesn't tax themselves, right? So if you have a public school in any of those areas, you don't get a lot of tax money to help with that. So what the federal government does is it's a program called Impact Aid that basically replaces that taxable loss, if that makes sense. So like Waukesha School and Blossom School, Selfridge, Solon, Cannonball, they all have very little taxable land, so they get this Impact Aid money which they can use for something like that. They regulate funding, they pull the research, the Department of Ed puts out a lot of grants for schools, organizations, colleges, whatever, to do research on different ideas, different strategies, ways to do things. So they do a lot of research in that way as well. So I talked about SSA, but presidents always talk about in presidential nominees about what they're going to do for education, right? So, or not do. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Right. Oh, yeah, throughout. Yep. And it's yeah. Right. Yeah. Yep. That is a lot of pieces of that, and a lot of times it's not always fall through, like I said. So unfortunately, I talked about the Department of Ed, use Department of Ed. So we did talk about per pupil expenditure a little bit. So on the school that you look at, right, like how much per pupil is being spent, how much they received. So that kind of gives you. It just lets know as like parents or people who are interested how much the school is spending on average per student on things. So each state gives public schools a certain amount per pupil. And when you look at that expenditure, that's not what a state will give. It's usually much lower. Like South Dakota is on average, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 per student, for example. And I remember the thing that you were looking at was like 17,000 per student, right? So there's other funding sources besides just the state in terms of for funding, so which adds into that per pupil expenditure. So I talked about this a little bit already, but property taxes is one. And this can vary from place to place, right? So if your public school is in an area where maybe the value of land or houses is not very high, the taxes are lower, right? But if I go to another district where the taxes on home values are in the millions and land value is way up there, the taxes are higher on that, right? So schools get some more funding from that. So which is a little bit unequal, right? Because just because where I live, the value of something is less, it means school is less like that. Is that fair? Not really, right? So basically saying that if you live somewhere where there's people who have more money, that are more valuable, then schools are better or they get more funding because of that. So a little bit of an equity, something that is always continuously is discussed about or talked about, is that should that taxable money put in a pool and then distributed equally, in the states to the public schools, usually it's not. Yeah, it would be provide more equality to the schools, but something that is always met with resistance, from those communities where they would be losing money, right, or the schools that would be losing money because it would be balanced out. So state also provides some sales and some income taxes. If the state has a personal income tax, right? South Dakota doesn't have a personal income tax, South Dakota does, so there's some funding in the state that comes from those as well. So sales revenue is really a big one for states in terms of adding some money. A couple of years ago, 3-4 years ago, maybe South Dakota passed a 0.5 cent or a 0.5% sales tax increase, and that 0.5% supposed to go directly to the schools for increased funding, increased salaries, and whatever they might use it with. So some states do that. We know it's not just people who are own a house or own land that are paying in for schools, but people who are purchasing products in states. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, there's different, the sales tax, some of our state taxes, some are local taxes. So just, but there's a 0.5% that was increased to go 22. So a lot of these other ones, there's a lot of grants is federal money given directly to states, and then they distribute it out, from there to the schools, depending on what kind of a grant, it is, what organization it is. And also, there's some different ones here in terms of funding that can go to schools as well. So each of these different acts provided an opportunity or some funding source for schools for different components. So, for example, Indian Education Act, right, is part of JOM Title VII funding that goes to schools that have students who are Native American enrolled in their schools, right? So it doesn't go to all schools just for that, but just schools that have those students, and that money is directly for those students. What is to provide support for learning, whether it's activities, whatever. There's a variety of components that go to. There's a variety of ways schools can use those funds. So it just kind of depends on the school and how that's set up. So same concept with bilingual. So some of these were pretty long time ago. So Vocational Education Act, there was a need for more training for students in the CTE courses, welding, carpentry, auto mechanics, some of those small engines, those types of things. So there was a push then for this Vocational Education Act where they gave schools more funding to purchase equipment, build shops, those types of things. So, let's see. We talked about a little bit in terms of tax reform changing, redistricting. People sometimes want school district, school boundaries redrawn so it can kind of even out funding to schools. When we're talking about bigger communities, that's one way. We talked about pooling the money, right, and spreading it out equally. School choice is another one, which is kind of like open enrollment, right? If that's something that is feasible or possible. Where I grew up, the nearest town from us was 50 miles, so even if we wanted to go to another school, that probably wasn't a reality in that case. But in our case here, we have a lot of students that will go to different schools, right? Mobridge to Wapala, the kids in Wapala that go up here 48 sometimes, or 48 in Laughlin, variety of things. Because one, it's closer, and two, also transportation is available for students, so that makes a big difference as well in terms of that school choice. If you have also a bigger community or a bigger town, that's an option usually as well within the school choice with open enrollment. This voucher system, we don't see it all around here, but voucher system basically say that rather than the funds, we talked about each student, the school gets so much per pupil, right? So if, for example, if voucher system, the state says, okay, if you get 4,000 people, you have 2 kids, and you want to send your kids to somewhere else, and that money will go with your student, like if you're a taxpayer or property owner or something like that. That voucher system basically says that you're going to take that money and go for it, and that follows your student. So we don't have that in North and South Dakota. That's not legal. The state legislature hasn't approved the voucher systems, but it is something that the current Secretary of Education at the national level is really trying to push for this voucher. Schools will compete for students then, almost like a business type thing, and then if they don't get students, then basically their school would not need to go to. But arguing against government money may be put towards religious school choice. So meaning that I want to go to this private Christian school somewhere, or religious school, or whatever, it's not Christian, and that public money then would go to a private school. That's concerns because students are not going to go there, or one year they might go here, next year they might go there, or something like that. That's concern, but it's not something we have to worry about because we don't have that here anyway. So we don't have any other options besides public or the mission school, or REIE schools, the grant school here, all that. Let's see. So standardization movement, besides just being a voucher component, I kind of said a little bit about charter schools, but we have charter and talks of charter for-profit, teach your own, some examples of schools in other states that are allowed. Okay? So charter school basically operates based on the agreement with the local school board concerning schools to be met. So they receive the same funding as regular public schools, but are a little bit different. Okay? So charter schools a lot of times have a focus on something. Like an example you use a lot is focus on technology. Doesn't mean they just teach about technology, but when they learn all of their subjects, there's a technology focus in it somehow. Okay? So they often use different innovative teaching practices. They're not necessarily as restricted as they are in public schools sometimes in terms of what they can or can't do in terms of their policy. There's usually a lot of parent and community involvement in the schools in terms of helping the classroom, fundraising, those types of components. But it's supposed to provide more accountability, create choice, hopefully reform some components. Because it's a little bit different in terms of the way they go about doing it. Research is not real clear in terms of if it's better or not, but a lot of times, with with charter schools, it's, there's an application, sometimes there's a fee, to go, there doesn't have to be, but it just depends on the school, how it's created, how it's set up, but it's quite a bit different than a public school for that. So it does talk about teachers being less experienced. A lot of times you don't have your veteran teachers wanting to switch over to these charter schools. Usually the pay is not as good, and also it's not as organized, or you don't have like needs necessarily for that. So for schools, we don't have a lot of those or any of those around here either. But basically, a school that's trying to make money, to for whatever reason. But teacher-owned schools also, which is something that we don't have, and I've never really seen them in action anywhere at all. But basically, like teachers, administrators, party holders, which they kind of are anyway in public schools, but they kind of own it and run it based upon their thoughts and beliefs. So there's still a board, but state oversight and state or federal oversight is not as much as a regular public school. So you get flexibility in curriculum, teaching method standards. So there's some different options there. Of course, not be options here about state. So yeah, that's a lot of information in a short period of time. But questions that you have on anything? Yeah, good.